Right, question of the week is back. This week it is, what do you think UK esports organisations need to improve on / start doing? A bit of an interesting one. Like, one of the big reasons why I like doing these sort of questions primarily is just to kind of get people's opinions, see what they genuinely think, because it's not as if you really see organisations or anyone like doing market research within it and kind of taking notes and seeing what people genuinely want to see and interacting with people. Everyone kind of goes their own way of doing things, but even more so, like, even if it is from this video specifically or just in certain responses that certain people have put that certain org owners might flash by and see and read and think, actually wait a minute, that's a good idea, let's start doing that. Whatever it necessarily is, but yeah, so we'll kind of crack on with it straight away. One of the first ones, and this one was the one that tilted a few people, I guess. So Kpiz decided to say, producing content, all I've seen from UK or top UK orgs is shitty giveaways no one cares about and roster changes announced regularly, boring. I did specifically ask who do you class as top UK orgs, and he was like, well, not even top orgs, well, not even just top orgs, but content from literally any of them is zero. The FM highlights from WCA China was a sick video, but that was ages ago. That was a sick video, so fair play to it, to FM on that particular one. But look, overall, the reason why that triggered obviously certain people was just because of obviously Eminem primarily, and obviously cows come flying in, tilted a little bit from reading said statement. But I mean, look at it this way, I think that Eminem are one of the few exceptions to what he said in terms of producing content, and I guess it's because he did kind of label it as no one, yeah, literally content from literally any of them is zero. So either he's not classing Eminem as a top org, or it just means in general and he hasn't noticed it, whatever it necessarily is. But yeah, Eminem are definitely the exception to that ruling. There are a few others that are starting to do a bit more, so Barrage I will actually give some credit to in some of the videos they've done. Like, you've got to think, say, like, I think one of the recent ones that Barrage done was like a Q&A, and obviously in an ideal world, sure, you'd love to have everyone there and then in one particular environment, and you can have the camera there and you can do a proper Q&A like that. That's what you mostly see, but they've done it the other way in terms of having like the everyone online webcam overlay and doing it like that. But the thing is with that is that at the end of the day, certain ways of doing content aren't always going to be viable, so you have to still give them credit for still doing certain things and finding an alternative and doing it in a different way. They've done a few other bits as well, which is always good. NSG produced a reasonably good video the other day as well, so it's consistency as well, though. That's the thing. Like, same with the FM one, like, it's all well and good having a nice video once every 6 months, but like, what does it really achieve? It's consistency is the keyest thing with it all. The kind of bit that I did get a bit irritated by as well is in terms of like I mean, don't get it wrong, shitty giveaways, sure, it might not help, like, no one cares about, for you specifically that might be the case, but at the same point, like, they wouldn't be getting X amount of retweets, likes, whatever it necessarily is on said giveaways if no one was interested in it. So kind of flaws that statement. Then obviously the last bit which did trigger me was roster changes announced regularly, or no one cares about, and roster changes announced regularly, boring. I mean, look, at the end of the day, how much control most UK organisations have over roster changes is fucking minimal. Like, literally minimal. Like, very few orgs have players on contracts, and this has been disputed like countless times already in terms of even if a contract is there, at this level it really isn't going to do that much in the grand scheme of things, because of either way, one person can probably get out of it, or no one's going to have the money, time and hassle to go take it to a lawsuit, or if said issues did occur with it. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the kind of roster changes announced regularly, I don't really know how much control the organisation has over that. Like, sure, I do think that the orgs might need to do a bit more due diligence in terms of before they pick up players and things like that, but at the same point, it's very, very hard to control. We'll kind of move on to the next one. So Cryptid CS was, depending on what orgs we are talking about, because honestly there are a bunch of 14-year-olds making organisations. you know what, like, yes, there is, and it's been a thing. Personally, I'd say you see it a lot more in the COD environment, more so than say like CS and League and things like that. It does happen in CS a little bit, but at the same point, like, if you're a team, a player, whatever it necessarily is, and you know what I mean, if people are moaning about 14-year-old organisation owners, don't fucking join them in the first place. Like, I don't mean that as bland as it is, but obviously, as I've just said, orgs need to do a bit more due diligence before they pick up players, and players need to do their own due diligence before they join an organisation. Like, so many people, especially like younger people, just spam about 20 orgs at once, just thinking, oh, we can get ourselves an organisation, we're golden, but they don't know anything about the org, they don't know anything about the people that run the org, and especially when it is like a 14-year-old person running it, it's not really going to work out that well, being perfectly honest. He did also follow it up with one of the biggest things is not to give players, teams false hope. That's happened too many times to himself and to other teams. I mean, I'm going to throw the question in there in terms of it depends on what sort of organisations you're joining, being honest. Like, I don't know too many ones that have gone down the road of giving people false hope. In terms of, I'm not too sure how much you can really give false hope without people either realising that it's not realistic what someone's saying, combined with the, especially as you go like higher up the organisation levels, then for the most part I wouldn't really say giving people false hope is something that really occurs. Maybe within, again, like amateur organisations pretending to say, oh look, you know, I mean, we can do this for you, we can do this, like, but personally I don't really see it that often in that scenario. So it might just be, like, unfortunately for you, you might have just been a bit unlucky in certain scenarios. So Jamie Harris, Gizmo, obviously Team Xenix, stop over-inflating the market. So yes, this is a big one. It's really difficult to judge though. You have to remember that, is that for me personally, like, if I was to say when I first started getting involved in UK Esports with frag and funding teams and things like that, like, the amount that it's gone up even in the last 3 years is actually quite considerable for the most part. That being said though, you have to vary it. So in terms of, you get the scenarios where obviously some random org will come in, they'll fund some team that's got like very minimal achievements, and they'll get like top 32 at LAN, and they've just had near enough everything funded for them. So those scenarios, yes, that is definitely what causes overinflation in it, because of, as soon as said team like that receives said funding and things, then people that place higher are then going to automatically assume, well, if that sort of team's getting that sort of funding, then we deserve it too, essentially. So then it just creates a lot more hassle, and a lot of people then start getting funding that is not necessarily deserved. It does make it incredibly difficult if you're trying to kind of go that way. But then the flip side of that is you have different types of inflation. So you can use, say, like even an endpoint as an example in terms of, say, like salarying players, and obviously there's a few more UK organisations that are starting to kind of get into that, especially with Gfinity coming up. But yeah, you could say it from like an endpoint point of view in terms of them salarying the players, sure, when they probably first started doing it. In terms of a value for money perspective, then yeah, I mean, I doubt there's going to be much there, but people are doing it and putting the money in it to give people an opportunity, to give people a chance, in order to try and then help it grow. So you have to kind of weigh it up in certain circumstances as to the reasons behind why it's inflated, as you will get it in certain scenarios, and I've done it myself in the past, even though I didn't necessarily have to fund as much as I have, but at the same point been doing it just to try and make lives easier for everyone that is kind of affecting, essentially. But there are various other kind of reasons as to why the market becomes inflated, and I think another key reason to that is expectancy as well. I think the way that a lot of people look at it now is that they look at the big scenario of what esports is as a whole, and they think, oh well, if that sort of caliber of teams, or if those people are getting that amount of money, then surely we deserve this because we're putting in the same amount of hours, blah blah blah, even though obviously the caliber is completely different. So yeah, I mean, that can also have an effect in terms of expectancy. So teams or orgs are then maybe forced to pick up teams that they're not necessarily wanting to spend the amount that they do or are going to, but they're not left with too many other options, and they would, in their minds, they would rather go down the option of having a team and overpaying for it than not having a team at all. So it does also come down to just kind of business acumen of said org owners in terms of making sure that they don't kind of think that way and overinflate it themselves. Sacco, obviously Esports News UK, so learn the fundamentals of business, value and motivate their staff, volunteers, players and the market themselves better. Think outside the box. So the think outside the box statement is very, very true. I think barring maybe about 10 organisations that push, and that's saying it as an absolute push, there really isn't that much differences between a lot of UK organisations in terms of, sure, it's a logo change and the name's different, but the vast majority of the time it's a kind of a website that doesn't get updated a lot. There's not really much marketing, there's no content, it's just a glorified Twitter page in many ways. So there's that scenario where if you're kind of looking at your competitors, I don't really think many people do genuinely think outside the box and think, what can we do differently? Like, what is going to be our USP? What separates us from that organisation and this organisation? And I think that's definitely a problem. I think there's kind of a very standardised way of doing things for UK orgs at the moment, and not many people are trying to kind of go outside of that. And I'm not saying it's easy, like obviously it's difficult, but at the same point, same with any business, is you've got to make sure that you are different and better than your competitors, and being perfectly honest, like it's not even just from a results driven perspective, but there's the marketing side of it as well, especially, which I don't think a lot of people do really put that much focus on, which I'll probably touch on one or two other points that have been made in this as well. So it was also like learn the fundamentals of business. So it is genuinely shocking, and I mean shocking, the amount of like organisations that I have spoken to that do not have a business plan, they do not have a sponsorship deck, they do not have a marketing plan, and you've got so many other aspects of just standard business fundamentals that people just completely miss out on. And the irony of it is you then get people moaning about lack of investment or lack of sponsors, but they have no information to provide said sponsors even if they came crawling anyway. So you've got to kind of weigh it up. I do think the vast majority of the time that a lot of UK organisations do struggle. I think they do genuinely try their best, but at the same point I wouldn't say there's really much of a kind of blueprint for people to kind of follow, and that's where it does fall on people to kind of think outside the box and kind of create new ways of doing things, and you be the person that sets that blueprint even so. So it's definitely a difficult one. I mean, I could probably spend about literally 40 minutes going through like just small issues on fundamentals of businesses that organisations do not do. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to think a business plan isn't just for the purpose of you writing down like your current thought process of what you want to do with the whole thing. Because I mean, the vast majority of people are responsible, be like, oh, but it's in my head, I've got everything, like jog on. Like an investor isn't in no way, unless you're like best buddies with said guy, going to invest in the money if you do not even have the basic fundamentals of a business plan, which obviously lay out your short, medium, long-term goals, your finances, how you plan on trying to make money, how you are going to market it, and obviously have a specific marketing plan that goes through all aspects. And it's just kind of like, if you don't have the very, very basic fundamentals like that, I'm quite curious as to how you think you're actually going to succeed, but you know, that's just my opinion. Don was also saying in terms of value and motivate their staff, volunteers, players, and market themselves better. So certain organisations I would say are very, very good from a man management point of view and a staff management point of view, essentially, in terms of the way that they treat their players, in terms of the way they treat their staff, how involved they try and make them feel. It's not necessarily, it doesn't always fall down on just how much they get paid, or even if they get paid. There are a lot of other benefits to try and, even on voluntary work, to make it beneficial for those people. But you do see it quite a lot of certain amount of staff that do kind of just hop from one place to another because if they haven't, I mean, it might be on them individually, certain scenarios, but also because of, I don't feel like in current times, I don't really feel like staff and players are really ever playing for the org, especially at a UK level. Like most of the time they're just playing for their team, they want to do well and they want to get a bit of support, so they just sign up to said organisation. There's very few organisations that I would, in the UK, that I would genuinely say people would be like, you know what, I'd really like to play for that organisation. Most people don't think of it, and I understand why, because of the level and the quality of where the scene is. But at the same point, yeah, in order to try and kind of motivate the staff and players and whatnot better, then you've got to try and make them just feel as involved as possible. You've got to be speaking to them regularly. You've got to be able to kind of have that connection with people. It's not going to happen in every single scenario. Certain people you might just not have the same wavelength as. You might like be amicable with said people, but you might not get along that well, whether it be differences of opinion. But yeah, for sure, like definitely something that's got to be done about that. And market themselves better. I guess this video is pretty much going to sum that up for the most part, in terms of just basic fundamentals of marketing that aren't being done from organisations that they definitely can do. And the one reason I say they definitely can do, and people can call me out on this for all they want, but from my experience of doing like an organisation in terms of UFrag, then we could have done so much more, and one of the big reasons that we didn't was probably just because of I wasn't motivated enough in order to do it. Like, I probably put in about 10% of the work rate that I actually needed to. So that's kind of my thought process in that, in terms of that if I can do what I did, and it's obviously nothing spectacular with UFrag, and put 10% effort into it, which obviously is a whole other debate as to why that was, but anyway. But yeah, if I can do that on 10% effort, then it begs the question as to what other people that say they're putting 110% effort into it. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be certain scenarios. I think one of the Richard Lewis videos summed this up quite nicely, in terms of there's a lot of very, very well-intended people out there and organisations out there that honestly mean the best and they're the nicest of people, and they'll throw money at you and they'll support you, but do they have the genuine business acumen to be able to kind of make it work and make it successful? Personally, I don't think a lot of UK organisations do, especially there's certain organisations that have been around for a fair amount of time as well, and it's just the growth has been literally minimal. And you see it in terms of they're not really doing anything different to what they were doing 4 years ago, and it's like, well, if you're still in the same position, surely there's got to be people in that organisation that are asking themselves, thinking, hang on a minute, we could be doing this better, we need to be doing this, why aren't we doing this sort of thing? So yeah, a lot of questions to be asked with that one, I guess. So yeah, I mean, personally, one of the things that I am potentially trying to work on is literally creating some form of just basic fundamental business plan template combined with a marketing plan template as well, just to try and kind of make it available to give people a bit more information, I guess, in terms of having them think out what it is definitively they are trying to do, and actually have that written down and have it on paper essentially. As I've got a few various ones that I've done previously in uni, I've got ones that I've kind of put into UFrag side of things, I've got a few others that are relevant to certain other bits as well, so it might be something that I will do at some point. I'm not necessarily saying it's going to be fantastic, 100% there's going to be people that can create better ones than me, I'm just saying maybe as a little helping hand. Following it up, so Crossy, more video and audio content. If orgs bring their own slant, there'll be a lot more interesting stuff to put out. Look, I mean, this conversation is probably going to go the same way near enough for the vast majority of this in terms of content. People want content, blah, 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 blah. Now, it is always easier said than done, and I'm probably, this point I'm going to make now is probably going to be applicable to various other statements that have been made from this tweet for question of the week. So, look, even if you're trying to do content for your team, now you've got to think that, bear in mind how frequently rosters change. As an initial point, it is very hard to build content around an ever-changing roster because there's two big points on this. Firstly, for certain parts of content, especially high-level content that you want that's good production value, blah, 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 it's costly. It's not as if it's cheap. So obviously you're paying X amount for the team anyway, then you've got X amount of stuff that you're trying to pay, whether it be for staff, whether it be for videographers, whether it be for frag movie makers. All of this does cost. Very rare times when you've got good connections, it will be free, it will be cheaper, but it still costs in some way, shape or form. So you've got that side of it, as to when you are trying to obviously arrange and put certain bits of content out there. Secondly, there are a lot of players which will give off the reasons of, oh, we've got poor internet, Plays TV messes up my computer when I run it, or messes up with CS. Now, these are issues, they do actually happen, but at the same point I do feel like people are trying to use it as a go-to excuse now, because of it is very easy for them to say so, be like, oh, sorry, I've got bad internet, I can't stream. Now, I'm not saying people should be forced to stream or anything like that, especially at the kind of AM semi-pro level we're at, but at the same point, I do feel like people look at it and use those sort of reasons as a cop-out in certain scenarios because they know they can get away with it. But yeah, furthermore, I also think that by orgs and whatnot producing content, sure, they have to do a lot themselves, and it is on them, and it is on them how involved they get the teams and their players. But a lot of orgs do weigh it up and think, well, hang on a minute, if I know this team probably isn't going to be with me next month, what is the point in me spending my own time, my own money, my own resources in order to kind of put more content out there? But the flip side and the argument to that is always going to be in terms of, well, the fact that you're not doing it, how beneficial is it really going to be for you to send a random UK CS team to a UK LAN? Like, you genuinely, you don't get that much exposure out of these events. Like, if from an I-Series, from an Epic LAN, you genuinely don't. It's not that beneficial. It really isn't. If you go into, say, like ESL finals and UK Masters, technically, like, because of the exposure you get throughout the seasons and things like that, yeah, that is beneficial. You are getting good exposure from that. But standard LAN events, being honest, you really don't get that much. There are more things that people can do in order to try and maximise that, but at the same point, in terms of value for money perspective, then no. But yeah, in terms of other like video and audio content that people or orgs could start doing and put their own slant on things, there's so many ideas. Like, for me personally, and you can ask near enough everyone that was involved with UFrag, like I'm pretty good from an ideas perspective. I just lack the execution and the effort to go and do the execution, which is why half of the ridiculously terrible quality videos that I'm doing now are trying to kind of make up for that in some way, shape or form. But bear in mind the amount of UK organisations that actually exist and the amount of UK players that there are across, like all across the board, esports wise, various games. The amount of content that actually exists is very, very minimal. And you have to also think that at the end of the day, players are the basic fundamental of esports in terms of that's what it resolves around them primarily. So it has to be on them. It has to be partly their responsibility in order to kind of produce it as well. And one of the big things that you do often find is most UK players and people within the scene will constantly bitch about the lack of content but do fuck all about it to help it themselves. So it's very hypocritical in a lot of like contexts, but yeah, I mean there are a lot of things that can be done. I know certain organisations that I do speak to quite regularly do have various bits planned and coming up, so hopefully that will happen and it will kind of continue. I think potentially with the Gfinity side of things coming up as well, with their plans to kind of the amount of content they are wanting to supposedly push out, then that will be very, very good if they do start doing it. Because if it's all about creating more of a backstory, more creating a log, like so many UK kind of CS people that are not even aware that a kind of esports scene and a competitive scene within the UK actually exists. So when these people come into it, like how are they going to find out about people? How are they going to know who this person's played for? How are they going to know what sort of calibre that person used to be and he is now? There's literally very minimal information out there. And everyone has to kind of chip in order to try and make that bigger, make everything more viral within the UK. And at the end of the day, like, esports is esports in terms of it's a marketer's dream in terms of like the reach that you essentially have from it and the little cost that you have to put into it in terms of like in comparison to conventional marketing ways of doing things. So look, like there's so many things that can be done, but esports is primarily based on numbers and its reach, and if organisations aren't producing content, they're not updating their websites, they only post good news when it happens. They don't release any, like say like a team leaves, they won't post an article about that, but a new team will come and they'll 100% they'll post an article regarding that. So yeah, I mean at the end of the day, just numbers and analytics, everything is key for that in terms of attracting more people into the actual scene itself. So everyone needs to start getting on that a lot more. hastE decided to say a lot of orgs failed to do the basics correctly, e.g. keeping up to date with what their teams are doing, tweeting out matches, etc. Josh Tesco did kind of reply to that, saying this is not always the org's fault, but communication between orgs and players is generally not that great. I mean, look, primarily it is upon the organisation in order to keep in touch with the team. It does depend on the amount of staff that they have, but from previous experience from my side of it, especially if you've always been involved in certain games and they're the ones that do take your key interests, you are always going to slightly lean towards that. But it then falls on you to make sure that within any lineup, there's always that one person, the IGL, that's essentially the team leader of everyone, and you need to at least make sure that you're communicating with them so that they are obviously updating you as much as they can, which is why obviously there's so many benefits to the likes of WhatsApp groups. You've got Facebook, like all these messenger type things, and you should be able to keep up to date in one way, shape or form. So yes, it definitely does mean a lot. You do see it a lot in terms of organisations not doing much in terms of social media, in terms of the current ongoings of what their teams are doing. And when it happens more so from the kind of higher up UK organisations, then it is genuinely quite disappointing to see, especially even if they have staff in place to cover certain things, even more so. So yes, I do agree with that, but at the same point, it is partly responsible on the players to try and get themselves involved as well, but I would still put the vast majority of that on organisations themselves to try and reel people in and make them have an interest and make sure that you are being kept up to date if you don't have the time to literally check out everything yourself all the time. Josh Tesco kind of also said in terms of securing sponsors, investors, obviously this is way harder than it appears. Yes, of course it is. Like, if it was easy, then every fucker would be doing it, right? But the way I look at it, and it's kind of just reiterating what I've said, I guess most of this video will be that, but I don't really see how a lot of organisations help themselves. I genuinely don't. Like, if you don't have basic fundamentals like business plans, marketing plans, sponsorship decks, if you don't have any form of real marketing besides a couple of posts on social media, like, I don't know what you genuinely expect. Why do you think people are just going to magically come along and start giving you money when you're not providing jack shit to them? Like, providing a team going to a random UK event isn't going to do much for that business, that investor that's kind of come your way. And again, it just falls down on analytics, the numbers, the reach that you have, which is why there's the amount of money in esports today, is because of the overall reach of it. Like, we have to do the most that we can within our respective scene, and obviously if we can branch out, then fantastic. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if org owners can genuinely turn around and say to me and reply to this and think, well, look, we've done all this, we've got all these content, we've got all the business fundamentals here, we've got all these metrics, then sure, fair enough, I'll shake your hand, I'll take my statement back. But I'm pretty sure near enough every single org owner out there would be able to turn around would have to turn around and say, look, we should be doing this, we need to be doing more, blah blah blah. Like, there's no way that isn't the case, surely. Like, there's exceptions, 100% there are exceptions to the ruling, but for the most part, you can't, I can't justify the bare minimum not needing to, or not being done. And to an extent it might be a bit hypocritical from me, just because of there were certain basics that I didn't do in previous times with you, Frag, for example, but at the same point I've kind of always openly admitted that to an extent with near enough everyone that I spoke to regarding it. And like I kind of said earlier in the video, that was mostly just down to laziness more so than a lack of kind of what needed to actually be done. Not that that's acceptable, it's not, but fuck it, past is the past. Anyhow, moving on to more, so we've got Nathan, which is so Chronicle, to start looking more professional and actually invest into the org's appearance, also to have close contact with their teams and to update their audience about them. Yes, close contact with teams is obviously something that we did just touch on, so yeah, I do agree with that. A lot of orgs do need to kind of make that better and make their teams, or just stay a lot more up to date with what the ongoings of their teams are. In terms of like updating their audience about them, then yes, again, I do think that a lot of orgs need to be a lot more proactive on social media in terms of giving more updates about the team, whether that's kind of hand in hand with the previous statement that they don't necessarily know what's going on with their current team. That could be a reason as to why they don't, who knows. But to start looking more professional and actually invest into the org's appearance. Now, being 100% honest, like, in terms of the appearance side of it and the way that it looks, then I wouldn't actually say that that's that bad. Like, I do think a lot of UK organisations, even if it is one run by like a 14-year-old, which is essentially a Twitter page, but for some weird reason, the primary fact. So yeah, I mean, it is. I do think a lot of organisations do actually primarily focus what their branding is like, and they get all their apparel out, even though most of the time it's the same design as what you've seen every other person do as well. But I wouldn't actually say the appearance side of things is something that's a big issue. Sure, it could be better. Sure, there's a lot more that UK organisations can probably do towards it, but I would say actually for the most part that it's not something that would need to kind of heavily be prioritised or that's severely lacking. I'd say within the kind of orgs, the org environment of those orgs that are actually relevant and actually matter to the scene essentially, then I'd say it's more than fine. You've got Rees in terms of investing their money into teams that won't make them money. Again, it depends on what way you view it. Like, I don't think the vast majority of people involved in UK organisations are directly out there to make a profit. Sure, as a basic business fundamental, then yes, you want to make a profit, but a lot of people invest in a scene in the hope that the growth comes in order to, obviously, hopefully by giving people a chance and opportunity, and if they do market it themselves properly, then they can get a bigger kind of profit or income at least from it if it does happen. But it also kind of falls onto the point in terms of what Jamie was saying earlier in terms of inflation, in terms of that a lot of teams do, or a lot of organisations don't spend their money wisely, and I'll hold my hands up to that I've done the same thing in the past. Mistakes can be made. I'm not saying everyone's going to be perfect, but it does depend on the reasons as to why people invest in it. Not like there are a lot of people that don't invest to make a profit, but they do invest just to give people an opportunity, to give them a bit more resources, to make things a bit better and easier for them. And you do, as much as sometimes it might cause inflation, but you do have to respect the people doing that in many ways, because of it is helping a lot of people out, depending on what the benefits are of it as well, because of, you know what I mean, you might fund that team and they'll fold a week later, and then lo and behold you're just throwing your money down the drain. But, you know, UK scene. Anyway, so Xela, more content like frag movies, bios. Frag movies are also something that are very lackluster and lacking in the UK scene, but at the same point, again, it's money. 9 times out of 10 you don't know whether your team's actually going to still be in existence after an event or after a tournament. So I get the feeling that a lot of the time they're not done is because of that, and people think, why should I waste my time, why should I waste my money in terms of doing that? But at the same point, I do feel like it probably should be done anyway. Like, even if the team does leave, you're still pumping out that content, so you're still trying to, personally, you're still actually getting more from it by producing that content, even if you're spending more money, but you're still getting a lot more from a marketing perspective in terms of like engaging with your audience and things like that, as opposed to just kind of funding a team, them leaving, and you haven't done any content, and that's even worse because of literally you've got fuck all from that. And then we've got, so TinCan, probably also down to teams expecting too much from orgs and expecting them to throw money at teams at LAN. Yes, I mean, I think this is one of the last comments that are being said, but I do definitely think that is a big point. The point I'm going to make now is probably not going to go down too well, but at the same point, you're seeing like mixed teams that are coming up, and they're like, okay, like we're just looking for an org to kind of fund us for this one event. Everyone knows this for this one event. People are in different teams already, but they can't go. Now, those scenarios, personally, I don't like seeing, just because of it's like, it kind of promotes mixing a bit more, and essentially you're paying out money, which even if they get a decent placement at that event, it's, again, like, you don't get hardly anything from that one event, or from doing half decent at that one UK event. Like, even if you went and won an epic LAN by funding a mixed team to it, you don't get fuck all from that, literally. You get very minimal from it in terms of overall exposure, in terms of people taking a key interest. Like, it's about consistency, right? So you can go and get that first place, but if you've got nothing to follow it up with the next event, what does it matter? Like, genuinely, it means jack shit if you can't follow it up with things in, like, going past that. Like, if you can, then great, by all means do it. If you're already winning these tournaments and whatnot, sure, I can understand the reasoning as to why you do it. It adds another one to the collection. But if you're a random unknown org and you're just throwing money at it just so you can get that one placement at an event and they jog on afterwards, it's so redundant, it's unreal. At the same point, like, I don't mean that just to kind of hate on mixed teams, because there are scenarios where certain people can't make it and people still want to go to an event, so they obviously form a mix and then they do it that way. It's always going to happen no matter what, and you do have to kind of accept it. I do think when it comes to that, orgs probably shouldn't be funding them realistically. That's just my perspective, but everyone's going to have a different opinion on that. But yeah, I mean, we've been over it kind of previously already in terms of I do feel like players in the current way that, or the current environment of UK esports scene, I do feel like a lot of players do definitively value themselves higher than what they should, and you don't really get a lot of people that are genuinely out there to kind of play for an org or even be that grateful of what they get. Like, obviously there's certain orgs that are an exception and certain players again that are an exception to this ruling that are grateful for opportunities that they've had or are currently receiving. But for the most part, I know so many players that literally do not give two shits about the organisation they play for, and they're literally just doing it to see who can offer them the best amount of money for going to next event, and then once that event's done, they'll reevaluate the options and do the same thing. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with always looking to do better for yourself and trying to get that better deal, but at the same point, I don't think you're doing yourself any favours by doing that, and you don't help the scene by doing it as well. And I think a lot of people are always very self-invested to an extent, only kind of like thinking about what's going to be beneficial to themselves more so than other people, and what effect it would have on the scene overall, as well as I think that a lot of players also think very short term in terms of that scenario, which can also link to a problem with potential rosters and things like that, in terms of how frequently they change. But yeah, I mean, that near enough sums up everyone else's input that they had on the question of the week. Most of my thoughts have obviously been given for the most part. Like, I don't really want to reiterate my point about continuously making content, but like I've said, and again for the 400th time this bloody video, like, if you're trying to attract people in, you're trying to attract sponsors, you're trying to attract investors, like, if you don't have basics there in place, you don't have business plans, you don't have any form of content, and like even more so actually, the one bone that I am going to kind of moan about on this is that it does also fall on those UK organisations that I don't feel like certain UK organisations that have been around the scene for a long period of time have really set the best example and precedent for new organisations coming into the scene. Primarily just because of you look at it and you look at the lack of content from the vast majority of orgs that have been around for a time, and it's pretty non-existent in compared to what they should and what they can be doing. Especially orgs that have had very, very good teams over the past as well. Like, I don't really see how you can justify not creating content around it at this point. And you see a lot of like certain organisations are lucky in a way because they are very well connected, and networking is vital, as it is in any like normal day scenario these days. But a lot of people kind of been saved by the fact that their networking is very good, and they've been able to attract certain investors and sponsors via that, more so than what their actual business is as a whole, what their product is, what their service is. So yeah, I mean, either way, all I'm going to kind of end this video on is, if you are a UK organisation owner, by all means keep grinding. Ask people if you need help, genuinely just speak to people, ask for people, get advice, try and see what you can do. Just like content wise, of course it's not going to be perfect all the time. Look at my videos, the production quality probably sucks, the content might even suck, but at the same point, trying and hopefully the same sort of content, if I'm still doing it within 3 months, will be a lot better. It's all about growing. Nothing's going to be perfect straight away, but yeah, just keep on grinding, and that would probably be the best tips that I could kind of suggest minimally. But by all means, if anyone does want to kind of have a more in-depth conversation about certain things that I've brought up or whatnot, by all means message me and we can kind of discuss it a bit more. Other than that, obviously remember to like, comment and subscribe, or hate, whatever it is you necessarily feel like doing today. And other than that, that will be the end of question of the week, so peace.